The frigid November air bit at the exposed skin of the city's elite, a stark contrast to the oppressive warmth inside the Grand Athenaeum ballroom, where the annual Children's Foundation Gala was in full swing. Alistair Sterling despised these events. He saw them not as acts of charity, but as transactional peacock displays, a necessary ritual of the wealth he commanded. He adjusted the suffocating silk of his bow tie and stepped out onto a secluded marble terrace, the city's glittering expanse sprawling beneath him like a carpet of scattered diamonds. He was searching for a moment of silence, a brief respite from the cacophony of forced laughter and clinking champagne flutes. Instead, his eyes fell upon a small, incongruous figure huddled near a stone balustrade, half hidden by a large Grecian urn. It was a little girl, no older than 9, her thin frame swallowed by a worn, oversized coat. She should not have been there. Security was notoriously strict. But it wasn't her presence that made the air crystallize in Alistair's lungs. It was the object hanging around her neck. Resting against the faded wool of her coat was a necklace of impossible intricacy, a delicate silver chain holding a pendant crafted from what looked like interlocking gears and strange, cosmic filigree, with a single, deep blue sapphire glowing at its heart like a captured star. Alistair's blood ran cold. He knew every gear, every twist of silver. It was a ghost made manifest. He moved towards her, his polished shoes silent on the stone. "That's my mother's necklace," he said, his voice a low, dangerous thing, stripped of all pleasantry. The girl flinched, her wide hazel eyes snapping up to meet his. She clutched the pendant protectively, her small, chapped fingers wrapping around it. He had expected fear, perhaps tears. He did not expect the quiet defiance that hardened her gaze. "It's not a necklace," she replied, her voice steady despite the cold that made her breath mist in the air. "It's a key, and it belonged to my mother." Alistair stared down at her, the girl's absurd statement echoing in the sudden, profound silence between them. A key? The word was a pebble tossed into the deep, still pool of his memory, sending ripples of confusion through decades of certainty. He had always known it as the Stargazer pendant, a whimsical name his mother had given the bespoke piece his father had commissioned for her 30th birthday. He remembered the weight of it in his own small hands as a child, the cool touch of the metal, the way his mother would let him trace the complex patterns while she read to him. It was a bauble, an exquisite, meaningless ornament. Nothing more. Yet the girl's conviction was absolute, her grip on the pendant unwavering. The world of logic and finance Alistair inhabited had no room for such riddles. He dealt in facts, in figures, in acquisitions and mergers, tangible realities that could be quantified and controlled. This was something else entirely. "That's impossible," he said, the words coming out harsher than he intended. "My mother was the only person who ever owned this. It was buried with her." He regretted the last part as soon as it left his lips. It felt like a violation, sharing that sacred, painful detail with this little street urchin. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of empathy crossing her face before being replaced by that same stubborn resolve. "I don't know anything about that, mister. My mom, Eleanor, gave it to me before she went to sleep with the stars. She said it was the most important thing she had. She said it would keep me safe." Eleanor. The name meant nothing to him, and the phrase, "sleep with the stars," was a painfully childish euphemism for a reality Alistair knew all too well. This girl was an orphan, a poor, delusional orphan who had somehow, impossibly, come into possession of his family's most treasured heirloom. A grave robber? The thought was vile, but in his world, a world of corporate espionage and ruthless competition, it was not unthinkable. Desperation made people do monstrous things. "Listen, child," he began, shifting his tone to one of weary authority, the one he used to dismiss junior executives with half-baked proposals. I don't know what story you've been told, but that piece is worth a great deal of money. More than you can possibly imagine. It belongs to me. I will give you $5,000 for it, right now. Cash. You can buy a new coat, food, whatever you need. He reached into his tuxedo jacket, his fingers brushing against the cool leather of his wallet. It was a test. If she was a thief, or part of a larger scheme, she would haggle, or her eyes would light up with greed. Instead, she recoiled as if he'd offered her a snake. "It's not for sale," she snapped, her small chin jutting out. "You can't buy memories, and you can't buy a key." There it was again. That word, key. What did it mean? What could it possibly unlock? His frustration warred with a burgeoning, unsettling curiosity. He had security who could handle this. They could take the necklace, remove the girl, and the entire bizarre encounter would be erased. He could return to the gala, make his obligatory donation, and forget he ever saw her. But he hesitated. The image of his mother's face, smiling as she fastened the clasp of that very necklace, flashed in his mind. He had to understand. This wasn't just about recovering property. It was about protecting a memory. And this strange little girl was now, inexplicably, a part of it. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice softer this time. She eyed him with suspicion, a cornered animal deciding if the predator was offering food or simply changing its method of attack. After a long moment, she answered, "Maya." "All right, Maya. Where do you live?" The question hung in the air, a clear overstep. Her eyes narrowed, her protective shell snapping firmly back into place. "Why?" "Because this conversation isn't over. I'm not going to let this go." He wasn't threatening her, not exactly. It was a statement of fact, as immutable as a stock market closing price. He was Alastair Sterling. He did not fail to acquire things he wanted. The girl Maya seemed to understand this on an instinctual level. She gave him a look that was part fear, part pity, and then, with a speed that belied her small size, she darted away, slipping past the urn and disappearing into the shadows of the landscaped gardens that bordered the terrace. Alastair didn't follow. He stood motionless, the cold finally seeping into his bones. He was left with nothing but the lingering image of that impossible pendant and a single, maddening word. Key. He turned, signaling to a man in a dark suit who stood discreetly by the terrace doors, his presence unobtrusive but constant. "Did you see that girl?" Alistair asked. The security chief, a man named Harris, who had been with the Sterling family for 20 years, nodded. "Yes, sir. I was about to intervene." "Don't. I want you to find her. Discreetly. I want to know where she lives, who she is, everything." "And Harris." Alistair paused, his gaze turning back to the empty spot by the balustrade. "Do not under any circumstances let her know she's being followed." Harris simply nodded again, a silent, efficient ghost, and melted back towards the ballroom. Alastair remained on the terrace, the distant music of the gala now seeming frivolous, obscene. The mystery of the necklace had taken root in his mind, a thorny weed in the meticulously manicured garden of his life. For the first time in a long time, the world had presented him with a problem that couldn't be solved with a checkbook, and Alastair Sterling found the sensation both infuriating and strangely, thrillingly alive. The following afternoon, a sleek, black sedan, so polished it seemed to drink the meager sunlight, slid to a stop on a street that was the city's antithesis. Here, the buildings were hunched and weary, their brick facades crumbling like stale cake. Graffiti bloomed in vibrant, angry bursts over boarded-up windows. The air smelled of damp pavement and fried onions. Alistair sat in the back, the scent of the car's Italian leather, a stark, sterile bubble against the world outside. A dossier lay on the seat beside him. Maya Vance, age 9, orphan, legal guardian, Sarah Gable, maternal great-aunt. Address, 412 Mulberry Lane, Apt 3B. It was all there, the bleak, concise summary of a small life. Harris had been, as always, ruthlessly efficient. There was more. Eleanor Vance, the mother, had died 8 months ago. Aneurysm. Sudden. She had worked as a freelance coder and data analyst, mostly low-paying jobs from home. The great-aunt, Sarah, was a 64-year-old retired nurse living on a meager pension. There was no criminal record for anyone in the family, no history of theft or grifting, just a long, unbroken line of poverty. Alistair stepped out of the car, his $1,000 suit feeling like a costume. He told his driver to wait, a command that felt utterly redundant in a neighborhood where the vehicle looked like a visiting spacecraft. The apartment building's lobby was a symphony of decay. The air was thick with the smells of boiled cabbage and dust. A single naked bulb cast a jaundiced glow on the peeling paint and the cracked linoleum floor. He took the stairs, the clack of his dress shoes echoing in the grim silence. Apartment 3B was at the end of a long, dim hallway. He could hear the faint sound of a television from within. He raised his hand to knock, then paused. What was he doing here? He could have sent a lawyer, an associate, even Harris. It would have been more efficient. But this felt personal. The girl's defiant face was etched in his mind. He knocked, the sound sharp and alien in the building's drowsy quiet. After a moment, the door opened a few inches, held by a tarnished brass chain. A woman's face appeared in the gap, framed by flyaway strands of gray hair. Her eyes, a pale, watery blue, were etched with a lifetime of fatigue, but they were sharp, intelligent. This had to be Sarah Gable. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice raspy but firm. She eyed his expensive suit with an undisguised and unimpressed suspicion. "Ms. Gable?" Alistair began, his tone calibrated for a boardroom, smooth and commanding. "My name is Alistair Sterling. I believe you are the guardian of a young girl named Maya." The woman's eyes narrowed. The door started to close. "We're not interested in whatever you're selling." "Oh, I'm not selling anything," he said quickly, placing a hand flat on the door. It was a gesture of polite restraint, but the strength behind it was unmistakable. "I need to speak with you and Maya. It's about a piece of jewelry, a necklace." Sarah Gable stopped trying to close the door. Her face went pale. "What about it?" "It belongs to my family, and it is in Maya's possession." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things. He could see the conflict in her eyes, fear, confusion, and a fierce protective anger. Finally she sighed, a long rattling exhalation of breath, and unhooked the chain. "You'd better come in." The apartment was small, but it was meticulously clean. The furniture was old and mismatched, the fabric on the armchair worn through in patches, but there were no signs of squalor. A pot of what looked like stew simmered on a tiny stove in the kitchenette, filling the room with a savory, homely scent. Framed photographs covered almost every inch of one wall, generations of faces, smiling out from faded black and white and oversaturated color prints. Maya was sitting on the floor in front of the television, her back to him. She didn't turn around, but he could see her small shoulders tense up. "Maya, honey," Sarah said gently. "This man wants to talk about your necklace." Maya slowly turned her head, her hazel eyes finding him instantly. The pendant was there, tucked into the collar of her worn t-shirt, the sapphire glowing with a soft internal light. "I told you," Maya said, her voice small but clear. "It's not for sale." Alistair ignored her, addressing the older woman instead. "Ms. Gable, I understand this must be confusing. That necklace is a family heirloom, one of a kind. It was made for my mother over 40 years ago. How it came into your family's possession, I do not know, but I assure you, it does not belong to you." "It belonged to my niece, Eleanor," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly, but her gaze was like steel. and now it belongs to her daughter. Ellie told me to make sure Maya never, ever took it off. She said it was her birthright. Her birthright? Alistair repeated, the words tasting like nonsense. It's a piece of jewelry. A very expensive one, I grant you, but it holds no power. It is not a title to an estate. You don't understand, Sarah whispered, wringing her hands. It was David's. David. The name from the dossier. David Vance. Maya's grandfather. Who is David? Alistair pressed, though he already knew the answer. He was my brother-in-law, Eleanor's father, Sarah explained. He was a watchmaker, an inventor. The most brilliant man I ever knew. He made things. Wonderful, intricate things. He made that necklace for his wife, Maya's grandmother, years ago. He poured his whole soul into it. The certainty in her voice was absolute, but it made no sense. Alistair's father had commissioned the piece from Cartier. It was in the company's archives, a point of pride. This woman was mistaken, or lying. You are misinformed, Alistair said flatly. I have the documentation, the original designs from the jeweler who made it. It was a sterling commission. Sarah shook her head, a sad, weary gesture. The stories rich folk tell themselves. David made it in his workshop, the one on Fleet Street, before they tore it down. He called it his astrolabe heart. He said it held a map. A map to what? Alistair asked, his patience fraying. This was descending into fairy tale logic. He never said, Sarah admitted. He was a quiet man, kept his secrets close. But after everything with his partner, he became obsessed with it. He told Ellie it was the only thing that could ever make things right. His partner? The dossier had mentioned no business partner. Robert Sterling. The name dropped into the small, cluttered room like a bomb. Alistair felt a jolt, as if the floor had tilted beneath his feet. My father? They started a company together, Sarah said, her voice low and laced with an ancient bitterness. Vance Sterling Innovations. David had the ideas, the genius. Mr. Sterling had the money, and the ambition. They were going to change the world, David said. Then one day, the partnership was dissolved. Sterling had pushed him out, taken everything. The patents, the designs, all of it. He left my brother-in-law with nothing, not a penny. Alistair stood frozen, the woman's words washing over him. It was a lie. It had to be. His father was a self-made man, a titan of industry who had built an empire from scratch. The official company history was practically gospel, a story Alistair had known his entire life. There was no Vance in that story. There was no partner. That's a very serious accusation, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. One you can't possibly prove. Can't I? Sarah shot back, her weariness replaced by a flash of fire. We lived it. I watched David fall apart. I watched him sell off everything he owned just to keep a roof over his family's head. I held my sister while she cried herself to sleep every night. That man, your father, he didn't just steal a company. He stole a life. He stole a future. Maya had gotten to her feet and now stood beside her great-aunt, her small hand clutching the woman's worn cardigan. She looked up at Alistair, her eyes wide with a child's simple, devastating clarity. My grandpa was a good man, she said. My mom said so. She said he put all his hope inside the key, so one day we could find our way home. The key. The map. Astrolabe heart. A partnership. The words swirled in Alistair's mind, a chaotic storm of new information that threatened the very foundations of his identity. He looked from the defiant child to the weary, resentful old woman. They believed this story with every fiber of their being. For them, this necklace wasn't jewelry. It was a vessel of hope, a symbol of a profound and generational injustice. He came here to reclaim a piece of property. He was now standing in the middle of a history he never knew existed, a history that painted his father, his idol, as a monster. He pulled his wallet out, but this time, he wasn't offering to buy the necklace. He extracted a business card. "I am going to look into this," he said, his voice strained. "If what you say is true." He couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were too vast, too catastrophic to contemplate. He placed the card on a small, cluttered end table. "If you need anything at all, you call me." He turned and walked out of the apartment, not waiting for a reply. As he descended the grim staircase, the smell of cabbage and dust seemed to choke him. He was no longer a man on a simple mission of recovery. He was a man standing at the edge of a chasm, forced to look down into the darkness of his own family's past. And the only thing illuminating the depths was the faint, impossible glow of a sapphire on a little girl's necklace. Back in the sterile sanctuary of his penthouse apartment, a glass box suspended 50 stories above the city, Alistair tried to work. He spread financial reports across his vast obsidian desk, their neat columns of black and red figures a familiar, comforting language. But the numbers blurred, the words turning to nonsense. The faces of Maya and Sarah, their accusations, their unwavering belief. It was all a cacophony in the usually silent, ordered chambers of his mind. Vance Sterling Innovations. The name was a phantom. It didn't exist in any public record he could access. He had spent hours with his legal team, running searches through every corporate database imaginable. Nothing. It was as if the company had never been born, but Sarah Gable's story had been too specific. Her bitterness too raw to be a complete fabrication. People could be mistaken, but the pain in her eyes was genuine. He swiveled in his chair, gazing out at the city lights. His father, Robert Sterling, had been a god to him. A distant, demanding, but brilliant god. After his mother's death from a sudden illness when Alistair was 12, his father had thrown himself into his work with a terrifying ferocity, building Sterling Industries into the global behemoth it was today. He had taught Alistair that sentiment was a weakness, that emotion was a liability in the boardroom, and that legacy was the only true measure of a man's life. Now that legacy was in question. Alistair walked over to a section of the wall that was, to the naked eye, a seamless panel of polished mahogany. He pressed a specific spot, and a section slid open with a faint hiss, revealing a climate-controlled vault. Inside were his family's most private archives. Not the sanitized corporate history, but the real one. Old photo albums, his mother's letters, his father's earliest journals. He rarely came in here. The place felt like a tomb, heavy with the ghosts of people he barely remembered. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound album from the early days. The photos were black and white. There was his father, younger, thinner, with a hungry, ambitious glint in his eye. There was his mother, radiant, her smile so much warmer in these old pictures than in his memories of her final, pain-filled years. And then he saw it. A photo of 4 people, laughing, standing on a plot of undeveloped land. His father, his mother, and another couple. The man was thin, with kind, intelligent eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses and a shock of unruly dark hair. The woman beside him was gentle-faced and smiling. Alistair turned the photo over. Scrawled in his mother's elegant script were the words, "Robert, Evelyn, David, and Anne, the future site of VSI. So much hope. VSI, Vance Sterling Innovations. It was real. David. It had to be David Vance. His heart hammered against his ribs. It was one thing to hear a story from a bitter old woman. It was another to hold the photographic proof in his own hands. He spent the next several hours poring over the contents of the vault. He found his father's early journals filled with his tight, controlled handwriting. The first few volumes were full of David Vance. David's schematics are revolutionary. Met with the bank today, they see the potential in David's work. David is a genius, but he has no head for business. He trusts everyone. That is a weakness I cannot afford. Then, the entries became more guarded. The mentions of David grew sparse, then ceased altogether. The journal from the year the company officially launched as Sterling Industries was missing. In its place was a small, velvet-covered box. Alastair opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded silk, was a single diamond stud earring, a man's earring, and a folded, yellowed piece of paper. It was a letter, from his mother, to his father, but it was never sent. "Robert," it began, the ink slightly feathered with age. "I cannot do this. I cannot wear the stargazer pendant tonight. Not to the launch party. Not when I know what it cost. I saw Anne today. I saw the look in her eyes. What you did to David was not business. It was theft. You broke his heart, and you have broken mine. This empire you are building is founded on a lie, a betrayal so deep I fear it will poison everything we touch. He trusted you, Robert. He called you his brother. That pendant, the one you had Cartier copy from his original design, feels like a millstone around my neck. Every time I look at it, I will not see a star. I will see the light going out in a good man's eyes. I cannot be a part of this. Evelyn." Alistair had to sit down. The air had been sucked from the room, from his lungs. Copied. Cartier had copied the design. His father hadn't commissioned a piece of art. He had counterfeited a soul. The stargazer pendant, the astrolabe heart, was not a symbol of his parents' love. It was a monument to his father's greatest sin. The guilt his mother had carried, the sadness he had seen in her as a child but never understood. It all clicked into place. Her illness had been sudden, but had this secret, this heavy, poisonous secret, been eating away at her for years? Had his father's ambition killed her as surely as any disease? He felt a wave of nausea. His entire life, his name, the company that was his birthright, the very building he was standing in. It was all a sham. He was the king of a stolen kingdom. The silence of the penthouse was absolute. But in his mind, a little girl's voice echoed with perfect clarity. "My grandpa was a good man." She said he put all his hope inside the key, so one day we could find our way home. He looked at his mother's unsent letter, at the photograph of two hopeful young couples, at the vast, glittering, fraudulent city outside his window. He finally understood. This was not about a necklace. It was about a debt that had been left to fester for 40 years, and the universe, in its strange and inscrutable way, had just sent him the bill in the form of a 9-year-old girl named Maya. His path forward was terrifyingly unclear, but one thing was certain. He could not ignore this. He could not put the ghosts back in the vault and pretend they weren't there. He had to know the full truth, and he had to find out what the key unlocked. Alastair didn't sleep. He spent the night coordinating a clandestine operation that was more complex than any corporate takeover he had ever orchestrated. He bypassed his usual network of lawyers and investigators, trusting only Harris and a small, fiercely loyal team of private contractors who specialized in digging up buried histories. He wanted to know everything about David Vance. Financial records, property deeds, medical histories, last known addresses. He also wanted to find the old workshop on Fleet Street. The building itself might be gone, but city archives would have records, blueprints, demolition permits. While his team worked, Alastair found himself drawn back to the photographs. He scanned the picture of the 4 founders and enlarged the section showing the necklace on his mother's neck. Then he pulled up the high-resolution images Harris had taken of Maya from a distance. He placed them side by side on his massive monitor. They were identical. Utterly, perfectly identical. But as he zoomed in on the pendant Maya wore, he saw something his own memory had never registered on his mother's. Tiny, almost invisible seams. The gears and filigree weren't just decorative. They looked functional. He remembered Maya's small hands twisting it. This was no copy. He suspected his father hadn't just copied the design. He'd had Cartier create a flawless but inert replica. A beautiful, empty shell. The real one, the one with a purpose, had remained with the Vance family all along. The key. By dawn, the reports started to trickle in. David Vance's life after the split with Robert Sterling was a slow, heartbreaking descent into poverty and obscurity. He took odd jobs, repairing watches and radios. He sold his patents for pennies on the dollar to predatory companies, just to pay medical bills for his wife Anne, who had developed a chronic illness. He had been evicted from 3 different apartments. The workshop on Fleet Street had been seized for back taxes and demolished 15 years ago to make way for a soulless glass and steel bank tower. David Vance had died of a heart attack at the age of 52. His wife followed him less than a year later. They left behind one child, Eleanor. The story was exactly as Sarah Gable had told it, only now it was supported by a mountain of cold, hard data. Alistair felt a hollow ache in his chest. This wasn't just a business betrayal. It was the systematic destruction of a family. He pulled on a simple gray sweater and jeans, clothes he hadn't worn in years, and drove himself, leaving his security detail behind. Mulberry Lane was just as grim in the morning light. He found Sarah Gable outside the apartment building, struggling with 2 heavy bags of groceries. He got out of his car and approached her without a word, taking the bags from her hands. She was so startled she didn't resist. Her eyes were full of suspicion and confusion. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice wary. "What are you doing here?" "Helping you with your groceries," he said simply. "And I would appreciate it if you would call me Alistair." He carried the bags up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. Maya was at the small kitchen table, hunched over a school textbook. She looked up when they entered, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw him. "I owe you an apology," Alistair said, addressing both of them as he set the bags on the counter. "Both of you. I've spent the night looking into my father's history, into his partnership with David Vance." He took a deep breath. "Everything you told me, it was true. My father. He stole the company. He erased your family from its history. There is no excuse for what he did. It was a monstrous act, and I am profoundly sorry." The silence in the room was thick with the weight of his confession. Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, her face a mask of disbelief. Maya just stared at him, her gaze intense and searching. "Why are you telling us this?" Sarah finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because it's the truth," Alistair said, "and because I need your help. I believe that necklace, the key as Maya calls it, is the only thing that can prove it." He turned to Maya. "Your mother told you it was a key. Did she ever show you how it works? What it opens?" Maya looked from Alistair to her great-aunt, who gave a slight, hesitant nod. The girl reached for the pendant, her fingers moving with a familiar, practiced grace. "It's not about opening something you can see," Maya said softly, her eyes focused on the intricate object. "Mom said it's for waking something up. It's a song." She began to twist the small, interlocking gears. A series of soft, precise clicks echoed in the quiet room. It wasn't random. There was a pattern. She turned one gear 3 clicks to the right, another 2 to the left, then depressed a small, hidden latch. The central sapphire retracted slightly, and the entire filigree design shifted, realigning into a new and different configuration. It was breathtakingly brilliant. It was a mechanical combination lock of a type Alistair had never seen. "She taught it to me like a rhyme," Maya said. 3 stars to the east, 2 rivers to the west. The jewel sinks deep to build the nest. She said it was the rhythm of my grandpa's heart. Alistair felt a shiver go down his spine. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. David Vance hadn't just been an inventor, he'd been a poet, a cryptographer. And this sequence, Alistair asked, his voice hushed. This song, what does it unlock? My mom was a coder, Maya said, her eyes glowing with pride. She worked with computers. She said Grandpa's heart song was the password to his secret garden, a place where all his ideas were safe. A digital vault. Of course, it was the only place that could have survived the demolition of the workshop, the passage of time. A secure server, hidden somewhere in the vast anonymous web, waiting for the right key. Maya, Alistair said, crouching down to her level, his voice filled with an urgency he couldn't hide. We have to find that garden. Together. I believe it holds the original patents, the partnership agreement, the proof of everything David Vance created. It's the only way to restore his name, to give your family the legacy you were denied. Maya looked at him, her young face preternaturally solemn. She had lived her whole life in the shadow of this story, this loss. It was a fairy tale of a stolen kingdom, her mother had told her. And now, the cold king's son was kneeling in her kitchen, asking her to help him find the door. Will it bring my mom back? She asked, the question so innocent, so filled with a child's desperate hope that it felt like a physical blow. Alistair's throat tightened. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently rested it on her shoulder. No, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry, but it can't do that. Nothing can, but we can make sure the whole world knows how brilliant she was, and how brilliant her father was. We can make sure their story is never erased again. We can make things right. He wasn't just talking about David Vance's legacy anymore. He was talking about his mother's, too. He was talking about cleansing the poison that had seeped into the foundations of his own life. Maya held his gaze for a long moment, a silent negotiation passing between the billionaire and the orphan. Then she gave a single, firm nod. Okay, she said. Let's go find my grandpa's garden. The search for the secret garden was a strange and delicate dance between old-world craftsmanship and cutting-edge technology. Alistair brought Maya and Sarah to a secure tech facility he owned, a nondescript building in the city's industrial sector that housed some of the world's most powerful data processing servers and the brightest minds in cybersecurity. To his team of elite hackers and programmers who were accustomed to dealing with corporate espionage and international financial threats, the sight of a 9-year-old girl and her elderly great-aunt was, to say the least, unusual. But Alistair's authority was absolute. He explained the situation in stark, simple terms. They were looking for a ghost, a dormant digital vault created decades ago by an unknown genius, accessible only by a key that was part physical, part mnemonic. The team was captivated. It was a challenge unlike any they had ever faced. They set Maya up at a workstation, the intricate pendant resting on a velvet cloth beneath a high-resolution scanner. They mapped every gear, every possible combination, while Maya patiently recited her mother's rhyme. 3 stars to the east, 2 rivers to the west. The jewel sinks deep to build the nest. The phrase became a mantra, echoing in the cool, climate-controlled air of the server room. The song of the key, they discovered, was not a simple password. It was a cryptographic algorithm. The sequence of clicks generated a one-time decryption key. It was a system so far ahead of its time that it was both unbreakably secure and, without the physical key and the rhyme, utterly undiscoverable. Eleanor Vance, following in her father's footsteps, had translated his mechanical genius into the digital realm. She had built the garden, David had provided the gate. The problem was finding the gate. The internet was a universe of unmapped territory. For days they searched. They deployed algorithms to crawl the deep web, looking for dormant servers with unique pre-internet era coding signatures. They chased down dead ends and false leads. The mood in the facility grew tense. Alistair found himself spending less time directing the operation and more time simply sitting with Maya. He bought her books and drawing supplies to pass the time. She drew fantastical pictures of her grandfather's workshop, a magical place filled with ticking clocks and flying machines, based on the stories her mother had told her. He learned about her life, her friends at school, her favorite flavor of ice cream, Rocky Road. He found himself talking, too. He told her about his own mother, about how she loved stargazing and the scent of jasmine. He spoke of a childhood he had long since buried under layers of corporate armor. In this sterile room, surrounded by humming machines, Alistair Sterling was, for the first time, simply a man, talking to a child. He was connecting. Sarah watched them from a distance, her expression a mixture of caution and a fragile, burgeoning hope. She saw the change in him. The cold, arrogant billionaire who had appeared at her door was melting away, revealing someone gentler, someone haunted. She started bringing them sandwiches and thermoses of hot chocolate, small, motherly gestures that transformed the cold facility into a temporary, unlikely home. One evening, as Maya was describing one of her mother's bedtime stories, she said something that made everyone in the room freeze. Mom said that Grandpa's garden wasn't just a place for his ideas. She said it was a seed that could only grow in a place that remembered him. A place that remembered him. The lead programmer, a young woman named Lena with kaleidoscopic blue hair, looked up from her screen. What does that mean? A physical location? Alistair's mind raced. Fleet Street, the workshop. It had been demolished, replaced by a bank. A subsidiary of a competitor, no less. It was a dead end. No, Lena said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Not physical. Digital. A place in the network that would have a record of him. Something official. Something that couldn't be erased. Harris, who had been standing silently in the corner, spoke for the first time in hours. The patent office. A collective light bulb went on. Of course, Robert Sterling had stolen the patents, but the original applications would have been filed under both their names. Even if the partnership was dissolved and the patents reissued, the original digital application, a ghost in the machine, might still exist in the deep archives of the National Patent Database. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But it was the only lead they had. Lena's team redirected their entire search, focusing all their processing power on the patent office's oldest, dustiest servers. They crafted a search query based on the unique algorithm from the necklace, a digital key searching for its corresponding lock. For hours, there was nothing but the hum of the machines and the rhythmic clicking of keyboards. Maya had fallen asleep on a small cot they had set up for her, the precious necklace still clutched in her hand. Sarah sat beside her, her hands clasped in prayer. Alistair stood with Lena, watching the streams of code scroll endlessly down the screen. And then, it happened. A single line of text flashed on the monitor. Access granted. Welcome, D. Vance. The room erupted. Lena let out a whoop of joy. The other programmers cheered. Alistair felt a dizzying wave of relief wash over him. He looked over at Maya, sleeping peacefully, and felt a profound sense of awe. This little girl, with her mother's rhyme and her grandfather's heart, had done what his billions of dollars and legions of experts could not. She had found the way home. On the screen, a file structure began to populate. It was simple, elegant. There were folders labeled Blueprints, Schematics, Notes, and one labeled Partnership. But the folder that caught Alistair's eye was labeled Evelyn, his mother. With a trembling hand, he used the trackpad to click on it. It opened to reveal a single file, a scanned letter. He opened it. It was in his mother's handwriting, but it was not addressed to his father. It was addressed to David Vance. "Dearest David," it read, "there are no words to express the depth of my shame and sorrow. What Robert has done is unforgivable. I know these words are hollow, but I want you to know that I see you. I know the truth. I tried to leave him, but he has his ways of ensuring loyalty. He has threatened to take Alistair from me if I ever speak of this. I am a coward and a prisoner in my own life. But I have done one small thing. Before Robert had his copy made, I managed to switch the pendants. He has the shell. You, my dear friend, have always had the heart. I do not know what secrets you have locked inside it, but I pray that one day it will bring you justice. Please forgive me. With deepest regret, Evelyn." So his mother hadn't just known. She had been an accomplice, albeit an unwilling one. She had performed a last desperate act of sabotage, a small rebellion that had preserved the key for 40 years. It was a final, heartbreaking gift from a woman he had never truly known. He clicked back to the main directory and opened the partnership folder. Inside was a single PDF. He double-clicked. The scanned image of a legal document filled the screen. Vance Sterling Innovations Partnership Agreement. It was all there, in black and white, signed by both men. 50-50 ownership. All patents to be held jointly. And then he opened the final folder, labeled Logs. It contained a series of video files, dated from the weeks after the partnership was dissolved. He clicked on the first one. A haggard, heartbroken David Vance appeared on the screen, sitting in what must have been his workshop. He looked directly into the camera. "My name is David Vance," he began, his voice hoarse but steady. "And this is my testimony. Robert Sterling was my partner, my friend, my brother. And he has destroyed me. But he cannot destroy my work. He cannot destroy my ideas. I am leaving this record, this garden of my mind, locked away. I don't know who will find this, or when. But the truth must survive. The truth matters." Alistair watched, mesmerized, as David Vance proceeded to lay out, with meticulous, devastating detail, the full extent of the theft, demonstrating the core technologies that had become the foundation of Sterling Industries. It was undeniable. It was irrefutable. It was the truth. He looked at the screen, at the face of the man his father had broken. Then he looked at the sleeping child who carried that man's legacy around her neck. He knew what he had to do. The path ahead would be a firestorm. It would mean litigation, scandal, the potential ruin of the company he had spent his life building. His father's name would be dragged through the mud. His own name would be forever tarnished. But for the first time, he felt clean. The poison was out. The debt was about to be paid. As he stood there, watching the video testimony of a ghost, a silent alarm, one that Eleanor Vance had coded into the system as a final failsafe, tripped on a server in the Sterling Industries corporate headquarters. It sent a single, encrypted alert to the chairman of the board, a man who had been Robert Sterling's right hand for 50 years, a man who would do anything to protect the legacy of his old friend. The final battle was about to begin. The boardroom at Sterling Industries was a cathedral of corporate power. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the glittering city skyline from the floor-to-ceiling windows. At its head sat Arthur Kensington, the chairman of the board. He was a man carved from granite and ambition, his loyalty to the memory of Robert Sterling absolute. The other board members, a collection of the city's most influential and ruthless figures, were arranged along the table, their faces grim. They had been summoned for an emergency meeting. Alistair stood alone at the other end of the table, a single data slate in his hand. He looked calm, but inside, his nerves were electric. He had sent them the files from the vault an hour earlier, no explanation, just the raw, undeniable truth. Alistair, what is the meaning of this? Kensington's voice was a low growl. Is this some kind of joke? Forgery? You know it's not, Arthur, Alistair replied, his voice even. You were there. You were my father's corporate counsel. You helped him draft the dissolution papers that cheated David Vance out of his half of the company. Kensington's face paled slightly, but his composure was unshakable. David Vance was a disgruntled employee who was fired for cause. He signed a non-disclosure agreement and was compensated generously. This narrative you've fabricated is slanderous. I have his video testimony, Alistair said, tapping the slate. I have the original digitally signed partnership agreement. I have a letter from my own mother confirming the theft, and I have the key to the vault, which, I might add, is currently in the possession of David Vance's 9-year-old granddaughter. A murmur went through the room. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. They were sharks, but sharks who smelled blood in the water, their own. This is a private family matter. Another board member, a shrewd woman named Victoria Thorne, interjected. If there's a legitimate claim, we can settle it. Quietly, a trust fund for the child, a check for the guardian. We can make this go away. Alistair slowly shook his head. This isn't about money. It's about justice. It's about the very soul of this company. Sterling Industries was built on a lie. We are all profiting from a crime. That ends today. Don't be a fool, boy. Kensington slammed his fist on the table, the sound cracking through the tense silence. Do you have any idea what you're proposing? You go public with this, you'll destroy us. Decades of work, thousands of employees, shareholder value, all of it gone. The company will be buried in lawsuits. You'll be ruined. Your father's legacy will be a disgrace. My father's legacy is a disgrace, Alistair said, his voice ringing with a newfound, unshakable conviction. He was a thief and a liar. He destroyed a good man and his family, and you all helped him. You upheld the lie. You cashed the checks. The poison stops with me. He looked at each of them, his gaze unflinching. These were the people he had spent his life trying to impress, the titans his father had told him to emulate. Now he saw them for what they were, hollow men and women clinging to a throne built on rotten foundations. I am calling a press conference for tomorrow morning, Alistair announced. I will be revealing everything. The Vance family's story will be told. Furthermore, I will be petitioning the courts to recognize the original partnership agreement. I will be ceding 50% of the company's controlling shares, my personal shares, to a trust in the name of Maya Vance. The boardroom exploded in outrage. Shouts of madness, suicide, and betrayal echoed off the glass walls. Alistair stood impassively, letting the storm break around him. He was no longer one of them. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. You can't do this, Alistair, Kensington said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. We won't let you. We will vote you out. We will strip you of your chairmanship. We will fight you with every dollar this company has. Do what you have to do, Alistair said, turning to leave. But the truth is out, Arthur. It cannot be put back in the box. He walked out of the boardroom, leaving a trail of chaos in his wake. The weight of his decision was immense, but for the first time in his life, his shoulders felt light. He was no longer carrying the burden of his father's sins. The press conference the next day was a media frenzy. Reporters from every major news outlet packed the auditorium at Sterling Tower. Alistair walked to the podium, not in his usual power suit, but in a simple dark sweater. He looked directly into the cameras, into the eyes of the world, and he told the truth. He laid out the story of David Vance and Robert Sterling, of genius and betrayal. He played clips from David's video testimony. He showed the partnership agreement. He told the world about Maya and the astrolabe heart that had kept the truth safe for 40 years. He didn't spare himself or his father. He acknowledged the crime in full, unflinching detail. Then he made his announcement about ceding half the company to Maya's trust. The news sent shockwaves through the global financial markets. Sterling Industries' stock plummeted. Pundits screamed that he had committed corporate suicide. But then, something unexpected happened. The story of David and Maya captured the public's imagination. It was a David and Goliath story, a tale of long overdue justice. Hashtags like Justice for Vance and Alistair's Apology began trending worldwide. People started buying Sterling stock not as an investment, but as a vote of support. Small investors, ordinary people, rallied behind the story. By the end of the week, the stock had stabilized, then begun to climb, fueled by a wave of public goodwill. The board, seeing the shift in public opinion and facing a PR nightmare of their own making, backed down. Their threats were empty. Alistair, by choosing to lose everything, had gained a moral authority that was more powerful than any stock option. He had saved the company by breaking it. Amidst the chaos, Alistair's focus was on Maya and Sarah. He moved them out of the crumbling apartment on Mulberry Lane and into a comfortable house in a quiet, leafy suburb, the kind of place with a backyard and a swing set. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a home. Sarah, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events, spent the first few days just sitting in the sun-drenched living room, weeping quiet tears of relief and disbelief. The fight she had thought was lost for decades had been won in a matter of days. Maya, with the simple resilience of a child, adapted quickly. She loved having a yard. She loved that the refrigerator was always full. But what she loved most was Alistair's presence. He was there nearly every day. He wasn't just a benefactor. He was becoming family. He helped her with her homework. He taught her how to play chess. He listened, truly listened, to her stories. He was filling a space in her life that had been painfully empty. One sunny afternoon, a few months later, they were in the park. The media storm had died down, and life was settling into a new, unfamiliar rhythm. Alistair was pushing Maya on the swing, her laughter ringing out in the clear, crisp air. The astrolabe heart was still around her neck, gleaming in the sunlight. "You know," Maya said, her little legs kicking towards the sky. "It's not a key anymore." Alistair smiled, slowing the swing so he could look at her. "Oh, it's not? What is it now?" Maya twisted around, her face bright with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. She reached up and touched the pendant, its sapphire the color of a twilight sky. "It's just my mother's necklace," she said, her smile wide and genuine. The object's great and terrible purpose had been fulfilled. Its burden was lifted. It was no longer a key to a vault, a map to justice, or a symbol of a stolen legacy. It was just a memory, a beautiful, treasured memory of a mother's love, a grandfather's genius, and the man who had helped her find her way home. Alistair watched her swing, his heart full of a feeling he couldn't quite name. It wasn't the thrill of a successful merger or the satisfaction of a rising stock price. It was something deeper, quieter, and infinitely more valuable. He had lost an empire built on lies, and in its place he had found something real. He had found his own humanity. He had found a family. And in the simple, joyful laughter of a little girl, Alistair Sterling, the man who had everything, finally found his redemption.